So without further ado, I'm going to throw to Robert Mitchell and his conversation with Anna-Louise Cole. Robert.
Thanks very much, Esteban. It's great to be here, and it's great to have Anna-Louise here, and welcome, Anna-Louise.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Good. Now, I think one of the best ways to introduce you before we start talking is to hear you. So here's a little bit of Wagner sung by Anna-Louise. Okay, so Anna-Louise, that must be bittersweet standing there in an empty auditorium singing. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's start at the very beginning. You studied in Melbourne. Was that where you were brought up?
Yeah. So I was born and grew up in Melbourne. I lived there actually until 2015. So
yes,
I went to the University High School in Parkville, which some people might know. It's a school which is both selective for academic purposes and also musical purposes. And in the end, I think the musical the wonderful music program was, completely life-changing for me, really. So I started year 7 and I took up the cello. I had piano lessons in primary school, but unfortunately I was not particularly good. But I had been taught the Suzuki method, which has proven actually to be a pretty big influence on the way I work as a musician now. And so at high school, I was just one of those kids that played and did everything. So I did all of the orchestras, all of the string ensembles, all of the choirs, the musical, and then because that wasn't enough, I also did Saturday morning music with Melbourne Youth Music, and eventually worked my way up to being a cellist in the Melbourne Youth Orchestra. But when it came to going to uni, I auditioned as a cellist and as a singer, and to cut a long story short, ended up only auditioning as a singer, and Merlin Quaife welcomed me into the course. She was the head of voice at the Con at that time. And I'd studied French at school, and then towards the end of second year, Ian Holtham, the eminent piano professor, had a connection to the Universität für Musik und Darstellende Kunst in Graz. And I was lucky enough to be one of 2 people. So I went with a friend of mine, a flautist, and he and I had a semester in Graz, which was where I started learning German. And so then when I came back to Melbourne, I had to decide if I was going to continue with my French degree or in fact switch to German. And I decided to switch to German. And so then I ended up doing honours in German and writing my thesis on the author Arthur Schnitzler and Vienna at the turn of the last century.
Right, so that's prepared you for Wagner in many ways.
Yes, completely unconsciously.
Yes. When did you discover that you had a voice beyond just being, being a school choir singer and soloist, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, my mother sang, so my mum was in the Melbourne Chorale. My father also sang, particularly as a kid. He was quite a wonderful boys' choir singer, and so I sort of always had a bit of a sense that it was there. And then it was just sort of something that I was conscious of being able to do. And so I started having singing lessons when I was in about year 8, the end of year 8 at school. It was, I was 14. And it was interesting. The reason I'll tell the story in a bit more fullness. So the reason I only applied to sing at the con is the first audition I did a double audition, singing and cello. For some reason, didn't get in on either. I suspect it may have been an admin error. And then I eventually got to reapply. And my cello teacher at the time said, look, you could probably be a very good cellist, but you're going to have to do about 8 hours practice every day for the next 4 years. And then it's really not guaranteed. And he said, because I also had terrible, terrible nerves as a cellist, like my hand used to shake. It was not good. And he said, what's singing like? Do you get this nervous when you sing? And I said, oh no, singing's easy. And he said, well, not everything in life has to be difficult, which was a completely life-changing sentence, because if he hadn't said that to me, I probably would have pursued cello and never really given singing that much of a go. And yeah, so from then on, I pursued singing as a way to be a musician. And did Merlin take you on as a student when you went? Unfortunately, no. She was full at that time. So they allocate the teachers. So I was learning from Loris Simon in Melbourne. I learned from her for about all through uni and then for a few years afterwards. And then I switched to learning from Anna Connolly for a while, which was really great at the beginning. After a few years, though, I needed another change, and had sort of a few years where I couldn't really find a teacher. So I'd started learning with Raymond Connell, who then moved to England, and had a couple of lessons with Ros Illing, who is a pretty wonderful teacher particularly if you have her voice type. But then through working with Ros, I came to know Raymond Lawrence, the coach, who's also the head of music for Melbourne Opera. And it was really the work with Ray that made by far the decisive difference for me as a singer. So,
and were you always identified as being somebody who had a potentially large, Wagnerian voice, or did you do the Ina roles?
Yeah. I literally did. My stage debut was as Selina for Melbourne Opera. It was kind of weird. If I look back on it, I don't really know if I didn't want it or if people didn't hear it in me, but I was always conscious that I could be very loud. I could be louder than, I could always be louder than I needed to be. And it wasn't until I started working with Ray when he said, look, this is a really serious, large voice and you need to own it and start to sing the right repertoire. And I took about, I think, 1.5 years of convincing. And then sort of at the same time, so I saw the OA Ring in 2013. I was able to get tickets to all of the dress rehearsals. So by that time I was working as an extra chorister with OA in Melbourne whenever they were there. And I was in everything except for the Ring, which I was sort of a bit unhappy about. But then on the other hand, it was excellent because it meant I got to see everything. And although I'd seen Walküre and I'd seen Tannhäuser, I'd seen a few of the operas separately. I'd never actually seen a whole Ring all together. And that was pretty transformative for me, really. I remember particularly after Walküre just going, oh, I reckon I might be able to do that. And so I took Sieglinde to Raymond. I took the first aria. And then at almost the same time, I was cast in the play Masterclass, the one about Maria Callas. And I was singing, you act and then you sing. And so I was singing Lady Macbeth's aria, Vieni fa fretta, which is, huge and very dramatic. And we sort of had this strange but wonderful kind of experience where finally we sorted out the problems that I'd come to Ray with enough that I could suddenly put my voice to these bigger roles, and it just worked. It worked in a way that nothing else had before.
Yeah. So how do you describe your voice now? Do you,
I'd say I'm
dramatic, lyric dramatic, certainly not coloratura.
No. I was once upon a time, but that didn't work. I'd say I'm a young, dramatic soprano.
Yeah. Now, the first role major role that you sang for Opera Australia was Aida, of course.
Yes.
Tell us about that, and because it was on the beach at Surfers Paradise, wasn't it?
Yes, no, a Coolangatta. We had an actual camel, a real camel too. And lifesavers, and the stage was directly on the sand, so all of our costumes had to be windproof, sea salt proof, and sand proof, which was pretty funny. It was a bit of a star-crossed experience. So I was in the second cast. Natalie Arroyo, my friend, was doing the first cast, and I took a screenshot of the weather forecast the day that we were supposed to open, because it said 20% chance of thunderstorms in the evening. And wouldn't you know, a giant electrical storm came over Coolangatta Beach about 15 minutes before the performance was supposed to start. And I was sharing a dressing room with the heiress, Sean Pendry then, who's a very good friend of mine now. And we were all ready to go. We'd had our costumes, makeup, wigs. We'd even had the microphones done because it was obviously on the beach, so there's no acoustic. And then suddenly our makeup artist, her walkie-talkie starts going, beep, 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 evacuate the beach immediately. Beep, 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 all staff assist, evacuate the beach immediately, because there was lightning 50 meters off the beach and 2,500 people sitting in metal chairs on the sand. So, yes, that performance was cancelled, which was terribly difficult.
Yes.
But then we did get to come back and do it again a week later, and that came off very well. Good. And I loved it.
Yeah, and with a large voice like yours, and how do you cope with microphones?
I try not to think about them personally. Good. So the recording that we saw at the beginning, that was recorded in 2 parts. So we did it was recorded in 3 parts actually. So as for Aida, so Tahu Matheson, the head of music at OA, conducted that Aida, and then he conducted the orchestra for Tannhäuser at Trackdown, the studios in Sydney, in the morning, and then I came in the afternoon, and with the orchestra in my ear and Tahu conducting in front of me, then we recorded my voice. Oh. And then about a week later, we got into the Opera House, which was incredibly special, and filmed it all together, me singing along with myself for the video. Which was pretty great. Yeah. But with the microphones, I don't think it's, a lot of people talk about microphone technique, particularly in sort of music theatre singing. I don't really think that works for me as a singer, just as a technician. If anything, I try even harder to just sing as in tune as I possibly can. Yeah. 100% in tune, and then I trust that the opera company will usually have paid outstanding sound engineers to fix the rest, which they do.
Yes. They do. Oh, that's great. Well, look, let's now you've chosen as one of your examples the Du bist der Lenz for Sieglinde's aria, you might call it, from Act 1 of Walküre. Tell us why, and why you chose it, and why this particular performance.
Yeah, so it's kind of a nice segue. So in 13, having seen the OA Ring, I was working as an extra chorister, and I worked up the aria. And one Sunday I had a coaching on it with Tony Legg in Melbourne. And then the Tuesday after, I was in Falstaff, which, Robert, I think you may have also been in Melbourne in December of 2014. And so I was in my green Simon Phillips dress, and Anthony Hunt, the then chorus master, called me into his office and just said, "We'd like to offer you a job." And I said, "I was not expecting that." But, you know, it was wonderful. And then I moved to Sydney with my partner in the middle of the year in 2015. And at that time, that was when the opera company decided to give me the understudy of Sieglinde in the 16 ring. And so I had this absolutely wonderful 2 weeks where I got to rehearse the role with Brad Daly, who had sung it in 2013, with Neil Armfield. And the way they had organised the rehearsal period was, it was just us working 100% on Sieglinde and Siegmund in Valkyrie for 2 weeks solid. And it was just heaven, absolute heaven. So I spent most of 2015 to 2016 learning Sieglinde, and of course, you know, watching everything, listening to everything. There are so many different ways that people approach Sieglinde, that so many different voices that can sing it. You know, a lot of sopranos with lower voices, or even some who have been or might be or maybe are mezzos, sing it, because the beginning of Act One is, it sits so low in the voice and it's so spoken. And so in my journeys of finding the interpreters of Sieglinde who I really loved, I remember coming across this recording, the Boulez Chereau centenary one, and being blown away. The first time I saw it, you know, I was just like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Yeah, this is Jeannine Altmeyer, isn't it?
Yeah, Jeannine. So she was a student of Lotte Lehmann's. And so there's this incredible like vocal pedigree that happens through her. And then of course there's Peter Hofmann, who I just adore. And the chemistry between the two of them is so exciting. I think this centenary ring, the Chereau ring, just captures the build-up and the pacing of that incredible act of music so beautifully. And so I feel like I just adore it. I just really adore it.
Well, let's have a listen, okay?
Yeah.
And there we must leave it, unfortunately. Yes. Now, so you're cast again in 2000. Well, you were actually cast in 2019 for Sieglinde. Did Lyndon ask you then as well to cover Brünnhilde?
Yeah,
he did. So, what was your reaction when he suggested that?
Yeah, I remember that so well. I said, just give me 2 or 3 days and I'll let you know.
Days?
yeah, I didn't want to, you know, Lyndon Terracini is not a man who's timely based. And I went and I called Raymond Lawrence, and I had a big chat with him about it, and his answer was yes, 100% yes, definitely just do it. I also called Tahu Matheson, who I've worked with so closely, particularly over the past few years. And Tahu was just like, yep, you should definitely do it. Yep. You know? And I think both of them sort of tried to talk me into it by saying, oh, it's only a cover, and, you know, if it doesn't work, you probably won't go on. It'll be fine. And then, so I did a whole lot of work on it. I started, you know, spending almost all of my time on it, working as well at the time with Donna Bolson, who was then the head of the Young Artist Program at OA. And it was pretty clear pretty quickly that it was kind of weird. I just learned Salome to cover Lise Lindström, which is pretty difficult. I'd covered her and also Amber Wagner in Turandot both times, which is also pretty difficult. And, you know, I got them both to a point where I was really happy with them, but the process of learning them and singing them in both of those roles was quite challenging. They're very difficult roles. But then I started singing Brünnhilde, and I don't know if it was because I was sort of so familiar with the sound world already, having spent so much time with Sieglinde, who I also then worked on a lot when I was in Vienna in 2017. It was weird to start to sing Brünnhilde, and it was just so easy. It was not hard. It didn't feel weird or bad. The length of it was just no problem. I never really got tired.
Wow.
And it kind of remains. It's been the most wonderful experience, really, because I feel like in learning Brünnhilde and now in having had 2 solid years of pretty much 100% work on her, she's helped me find the best bits of my voice, I think. And I just adore it.
Yeah. So what are the sort of challenges of that preparing and performing 2 roles in one in the same opera in one season? You know, can you rehearse them both or on the one day, for example?
Yeah, we did. I did. So I think that the thing that really made it really clear to me that Brünnhilde was going to be my role was just before the world was shutting down in March of 2020, we had what was supposed to be a 3-week rehearsal period on the Ring with Zhizhen, and the costume designer came out, and the amazing digital team was all there, and it was quite eerie because the weekend where they closed the opera was the weekend just after we'd started, and we'd had kind of a Sitzprobe, like a musical rehearsal with all the Valkyries in the room for the first time, which was incredibly exciting.
And
that
very
was on
noisy.
Thursday. Yeah, it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And then the Friday was the day that the Prime Minister announced that I'm going to the footy, but everything's off from Sunday. And, you know, I don't know how everybody else remembers that time, but my sense was that everybody was just completely bamboozled and did not know what was happening. And so we just kind of kept going. And, you know, as the week went on, that first week of rehearsals, there were fewer and fewer people coming in. The international team started flying off. I remember poor Shane Laurentiev's son had a friend who had it, so Shane was taken out because he was in quarantine for 2 weeks. It was just this crazy time. But then in the middle of it, we were rehearsing Valkyrie, and we managed to block the whole thing in 2 weeks. And I was singing both Sieglinde and Brünnhilde the whole time for both, because my cover as Sieglinde was Livia Cranwell, and she was still in Vienna at the time. She flew in, but she was stuck in quarantine, so she couldn't sing. And it was one of the most intense 2-week periods I think I've ever had, because, you know, you can imagine, you can all remember what it was like in those sort of last days of March when everything was just sort of collapsing all over the world. And then there we were, you know, screaming out Wagner all day long and washing our hands like Lady Macbeth, you know, because we thought it was all about hand washing back then. Yeah. And so I was singing Sieglinde and Brünnhilde at the same time, rehearsing them both 6 days a week, all day long. You know, in Walküre, there's only the scene with Fricke and Wotan that neither Sieglinde nor Brünnhilde is in. And
yes.
so I really just had this sense of kind of like, okay, the bar has been set and I must surmount this if I want to show myself that I can do this. And I think I did.
Oh, good. Fantastic. That's wonderful. And so we'll then move on to Siegfried, which is and your next choice is Kirsten Flagstad. So,
oh, yes.
So tell me about why you chose this and your your thoughts on Flagstad's voice.
Oh, she's pretty extraordinary. I think
I'll just interrupt you. She was Richard Bonning's next favourite singer after his wife. So there you go, or still is, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes, Maestro Bonning has very good taste in singers. I absolutely love Flagstad's recordings. I think probably the thing I love the most is just the clarity and the directness of her sound. You know, she doesn't cut corners, she doesn't compromise at all, anything really. If she makes a compromise, it's for a musical reason, it's never for a vocal reason. So as a singer, me listening to her as somebody who's trying to work out how she's singing it, how she's approaching it, you know, of course there's an element of magic that you can never know, but to listen to her as a singer coming into this role has just been the most incredible education. You know, I can't quite separate her from Nilsson as my favourites. They're both pretty great.
Right.
And then of course Dame Gwyneth, I think, has moments of radiance, absolute radiance. But yeah, I think when I first knew that I had the role, I found this recording, I couldn't find it on YouTube, but I found it on Spotify, of Flagstad and Set Svanholm, her longtime collaborator, doing Siegfried and then Götterdämmerung. And I just fell in love with it. And I think having been a Suzuki child, I do a lot of my learning by ear, at least at first. I still definitely do the old-fashioned sitting at the piano and plonking it out. But learning by ear is a really big part of how I learn music. And so I try to listen to as many different versions of whatever it is that I'm working on at the same time, so that I don't pick up one particular version or a particular singer's habits or something like that. And Flagstad just is one of those ones that I just always return to.
Well, let's have a listen. This is Ewig from the Act 3 of Siegfried. That was a few bars with Set Svanholm. It was a 1951 studio recording with Georges Sébastian conducting. But and you know, at the beginning of that, Flagstad's soft singing is exquisite. And this could be a little bit controversial, but do you think you would have had enough stage rehearsal time in Brisbane to gauge whether you could sing that softly on stage?
Yeah. I'm not really so worried about that. I think also doing Sieglinde as well will give me a really good sense of exactly what I can do with my voice when it's at its quietest, because I mean, at the beginning of Ewig, Ich, the orchestration is just the strings, but it's sort of in the middle of the voice and it's very, very contained. But then if you think about the beginning of Act 1 of Sieglinde, Ein fremder Mann, you know, it's very low. It's at the bottom of the stave. So towards the bottom of her voice, and it's quite awkward in terms of how Wagner's written it, in terms of the way the female voice works. We've got a passaggio there. And so, yeah, I think Sieglinde will actually be very helpful in terms of working out how the acoustics of the theatre will work.
Yes. Yes, indeed. In fact, you know, is Wagner both as librettist and composer? Do you find him sympathetic to the soprano voice? And also, I do want to ask you about you were talking about your Suzuki experience of from doing things from memory, from listening. What about learning the language, which of course is very individual? Wagner's language, German version of German, is very individual.
Yeah. So sorry, what was the first question? I just forgot.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I've just had to fiddle with my sound.
That's okay.
Complicated. Yeah. Now, do you find that? Well, you feel.
How does Wagner write the words, and then how do I memorize the words?
Yeah.
The words one is kind of an easy one. For me, I find it almost impossible to memorize any music in any language if I don't know what I'm saying.
Yes.
So what I'll usually do, I've got a score. Oh, just give me a sec, I'll show you. So I'll go through towards the beginning of my learning, and I'll go through and find the words, particularly in Wagner, the words that don't immediately come to me so easily. So, you know, ein fremder Mann, that's pretty easy German, an unknown man. But, you know, as well, when it's somebody else singing, like I'm looking at the middle of the Todesverkündigung, in the middle of Walküre. And so I'll go through and I'll write, so Siegmund sings a line, kannst du nun höhnen, so hebe dich fort. So fortheben is a separable verb, and that means take yourself away. And so in my score, kannst du nur, I haven't written because can you only, fine. Höhnen, I don't think I've ever said that word in German, which means scoff. So I've written scoff. So hebe dich fort, and I've got take yourself away in my little signal for a separable verb. And so once I can have in my subconscious really what it is that I'm saying, I don't find it so hard to memorize.
Yeah.
You know, obviously with German, you've got to be really careful of the articles and the endings.
Yes.
Because the native speaker, Liebhabern, it's very jarring to have those all being incorrect. So you still, you know, you really have to be on your game with all of that.
Yes.
And that is just repetition and being careful, and also being aware of what it is that you're saying. You know, as somebody who's learned German, I have a sense of the genders of the words, some of the words that I know. It's pretty hard, I think, to get a really innate sense of the genders of words as a non-native speaker. But yeah, that's what I try and work on. As for how Wagner writes for the voice, it's really interesting. I think it's fair to say, between the three Brünnhildes, the writing for the voice is quite different. And then to take Sieglinde in there as well, again, it's very different. And I think I definitely see in his vocal writing the big gap that he had in between composing Walküre and then Siegfried and Götterdämmerung. If you think of the way he uses the height of the top of the voice for Brünnhilde, apart from the Hoyerterhose, Walküre doesn't actually spend that much time up there. Whereas, of course, the end of Siegfried and Ewig war ich, and then the start of Götterdämmerung, you know, are way, way up there, a lot. I think it's one of the challenges of really of singing Brunhilde is to bring the same voice to all of the different aspects of her as she changes, you know. So if you think about her in Valkyrie, she sees herself as a sister and as a daughter, which, you know, if I think about my own life, obviously that was the way that I first saw myself. I have two sisters. Mm. And so that kind of world of having the relationship with your father and the relationship with your sisters is very, very familiar to me. And then you get into her growth, which starts to happen in the Todesverkündigung, and you see how Wagner starts to change the way that he writes for her voice as that scene goes on. Like, it's critical to who she is as a character. And you don't really get into that kind of like high dramatic expression with these long lines and massive leaps until the very end of Valkyrie, where the writing starts to mimic some of the other writing that you get in Götterdämmerung. Vocally, there are quite a few similarities, I think, between the last scene of Valkyrie and the Immolation, in the way that the intervals sit in the voice and the way the pacing goes and the words and the breath, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wagner, I love singing it. I really do. Mm. It can be tricky, I think, for people who don't have some experience with the language, because, you know, he is unique in having composed the words and the music sometimes at the same time, and definitely having sculpted the words and sculpted the language to fit with the music that he was presenting. And so I think it feels much more natural to me, I think, because I understand the language kind of at a basic level without having to try very hard. At a more advanced level, certainly, you know, got to get my grammar books out and get the big dictionary there and do the homework. But I think that's, for singing Wagner, I think for any singer, that's the major hurdle, to really express what he has on the page honestly.
Yeah. Now, you know, along with Isolde's Liebestod, the Immolation Scene must be one of the most challenging scenes in Wagner's mature operas. Why have you chosen this? Well, I can imagine why you've chosen this, but and it's with Birgit Nilsson and recording the final scene with Scholti back in 1964. Yes.
I mean, I know I'm speaking to people who've seen many more rings than I have, but I'll never forget in 2016, you know, having sung the Norns 5.5 hours earlier, we hung around backstage waiting for the bows at the end. And I will never forget the experience of standing side of stage and watching Lise do that immolation and, you know, feel the heat of the flames as they went up the sides of the house.
Yeah.
And I was standing there most of the time with Taryn Fiebig, our beloved departed friend. And just, I'll never forget every night, every time we did it, just the incredible way that Wagner has brought together all of the disparate themes of this opera and this journey that this incredible woman has been on into this one 15-minute absolute expression of genius. And it sticks with you. I mean, I don't know how everybody else finds it, but certainly a number of times after I'd gone home, you know, the next day you'd want to listen to it again. You know, you didn't want to give that feeling up. And so that was why I had to include something.
Yeah. So it's interesting that it ends with the orchestra playing the theme that Sieglinde first sings when she finds out she's pregnant with Siegfried.
Yeah.
It's very
Absolutely.
special. Well, let's listen to this. This is actually from the documentary called The Golden Ring. Yes, and
it's incredible.
Yes, and it's interesting also to notice that the recording technique where she's singing some low, has to sing some low notes, and the orchestra comes in very loud, and the chap moves the music stand away so she can step forward, but she always leans back when she sings her high notes, which is
too freudig.
Absolutely fascinating, a real lesson. Anyhow, here's the Immolation Scene. Sorry, I had to fade it out there, but we need time to talk, and also we need time for questions. Thank you for choosing all those excerpts, Anna-Louise. That's really wonderful. And
my pleasure.
Yeah.
I love them.
So do we have Esteban? Perhaps you could ask our listeners and viewers if there are any questions that they'd like.
Yeah, I might just throw it open. I think there's nothing in the chat, so if you have a burning question, please.
Oh, my chat says there are 3.
Oh, okay. Oh, because you've got. Oh, here we go. They're coming through. Yes.
Right. Oh, what was the film of the last title? Yes, it's the Golden Ring, which was the documentary made about the making of the Decca ring in the 60s. Anything else coming up?
Nothing from here.
Right. Well, Anna-Louise, I was going to leave this for the questioners to ask, but I will ask you: how do you feel about the cancellation, and is there any consolation in that? I know that Australia hasn't announced next year's season yet, but do you know if you'll be getting a chance to be on stage next year?
Yeah, I can't talk about it, but yes, there's a fairly special consolation prize that will happen in summer. So keep your eyes peeled.
Yes.
I think the season launch is happening on I think it's the 6th of October or the 22nd of October. Anyway, it's coming up quite soon. So once that happens, I'll be allowed to talk about it. How do I feel about it being postponed? It was a terrible feeling in July and August to see that snowball rolling down the hill of things getting worse and worse again, and us not being able to change it. I know the company worked as hard as they could have. I know they really tried everything possible to get it to happen.
There were going to be football-like bubbles for rehearsals and everything, weren't there?
Yeah.
You might be able to tell our audience about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was back and forth, and at one point I received a phone call saying, "Get ready, we're going to put you on a plane in 2 days," and then the next day it'd be, "Actually, no, stand down, we can't do it yet, but wait, it's coming, be prepared." And so I always kept saying, do I pack my suitcase now, or do I just update my packing list? Which one is it? And I never got the suitcases off the top because I didn't want to tempt fate. Sadly, it didn't work. But yeah, it was about 3 weeks of get ready because this is going to happen. Oh no, that hasn't worked. Oh, get ready because now this is going to happen. Oh no.
And there were various places like not only Brisbane, but Orange at one stage.
Orange, Brisbane, Cairns. I know they tried to see what could happen here. I'm fairly sure that they talked to Bangara, who quarantined in Howard Springs. You know, they tried as much as they could, and you know, you can't argue with Delta, unfortunately.
No.
It is definitely a postponement, not a cancellation. I've been told that numerous times by Lyndon, but it's still, I don't know. I was thinking about it. I was reading an article this morning about the impact of COVID and lockdowns on children, and the impact on them of losing experiences that they will never be able to have again. Obviously, the impact on us is not the same as children, but the impact on the arts is pretty terrible. And it's just, you know, if a tree doesn't fall in the woods and it doesn't make another tree fall, then how do you know what was going to happen? You can't. But, you know, it is, I'm still incredibly sad about it, but what can you do?
Yes, at least you have something to look forward to at this stage.
Yes. I have a book, a great book called The Daily Stoic, which has been quite helpful in these times. Just dip into Stoicism as a philosophy, and you know, keep practicing, keep doing my vocal exercises. Yes,
very good. Yes. Well, thank you very, very much. And I'll pass over to Esteban now to formally thank you, Anna-Louise. And, you know, I'm looking forward to the announcement of your next role for the summer season. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the last hour with us, and for also sharing those wonderful clips of great singers, and seeing once again the wonderful Birgit Nilsson. She wasn't on stage, but she was still acting, and I think that's one of the great things about these iconic singers. And I hope that in the not too distant future we can both hear and see you on stage in Wagner or whatever else that you might be in. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Stay safe. Keep practicing. Keep that voice well.
Oh, yes, I will.
Oh, and by the way, we'll put those the URLs of all the video clips that we took from you chose from YouTube, so that people who are interested can watch them in their complete form as well.
Yes.
So,
Liz
put them on our website.
Liz Bergman, who's in charge of the website, will wheel her magic on that and have them up there for members to enjoy. So once again, Anna-Louise, thank you so much, and we'll see you in the not too distant future, I hope.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to talk about this again.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. I think I might draw this to a close. Thank you, everybody, for sharing the last hour with us. And there is another Zoom event coming up in October, which we will let you know about in the e-news coming through. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.